Hey guys, this is Sharat with Recently. I'm the host of the Recently podcast. It's my pleasure to have Stephen Howell on this podcast. Really looking forward to talking to him. Stephen, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent, Sharad. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's a pleasure to be here and excited to chat and dive in and provide some value for your audience. So
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Yeah, let's just get started and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're joining in from, what do you do, and how long you've been, doing real estate investing for.
yeah, so my journey of real estate investing started way back in 2009. I'm coming from Dayton, Ohio. So I'm about an hour north of Cincinnati, also about an hour away from Columbus. So here in the Midwest. And I got started in 2009 when I was at a corporate financial role. I was, doing investments and enrolling people in their 401ks and the Series 7 and all that stuff fresh out of college for a couple of years. And then I went full time into real estate in 2 years later in 2011 and have been doing it ever since.
So what was it in 2009? This says I started in 2010 in Indiana, by the way. So this was like right when the housing market was crashing. So
Yeah.
probably not the most fun time for someone to get started. The market hadn't bottomed at that time. So what was it about real estate that you're like, you know what? I know everyone is running away from it, but I'm going to go in that direction.
Yeah, it was something. So yeah, the market was going crazy. So at the time, I was living in Northern Kentucky, like right by Cincinnati. Got a college degree in marketing. I was working at Fidelity Investments, and so I saw, firsthand, like just people calling in their 401ks, IRAs, that whole thing. In my early 20s, and so I was interested in real estate. Like a lot of people, I was watching the house flipping shows, the ones that were on back then. My girlfriend at the time, who then became my fiance and now my wife, we were very, very interested in kind of getting our hands into real estate. And so like a lot of folks, one of the late night infomercials with my best friend at the time, we went in on like a $10,000, course type thing and started implementing that, in 2009 while I was at the full-time job. So
It's awesome, man. You're one of the success stories from those infomercial. Yeah.
yeah, it took a little bit to get going. I think,
Yeah.
we're, looking back, just, kind of dipping the toes in the water. And it took a little, like we did a lot of things wrong. And I remember looking at some of those first houses and comping them all wrong and all that jazz. And then eventually landed the first deal, proof of concept. But to answer your question, one of the things that kind of really kind of heightened things up and really led me to leaving Fidelity and doing this full time is I went to a few local meetups in Cincinnati, and there was a couple of brothers at that time that owned a couple hundred units by the university, and they were also flipping a couple dozen houses a year, wholesaling like 80 something houses. And I'm like, man, these are people I need to really be around. And so, long story short, over like a 6-month period, we ended up kind of coming under their wing, and there was a real opportunity there. And I said, hey, like, why don't you come on board? And we're really doing some great things in Cincinnati, but like, what if you led some of our acquisitions in Columbus? And this is 2 years into me doing it, and so I'm putting out bandit signs. Connecting with realtors. I'm doing some cold calling. And I just kind of started to realize like I need to do something a little bit different than what everybody else is doing. So that's when I was thinking niche of like, what are the different niches, the foreclosures, the pre-foreclosures. And then I stumbled across probate and started really deep diving that right before I kind of came under their wing. And there was a couple national folks that I was following, and I was like, they're kind of tippy-toeing around probate, but I'm gonna kind of implement what they're teaching and see if there's something here. And I started to really get results with that. And then the two folks that I kind of came under to lead their acquisitions, lo and behold, there was a pretty big thrust with probate, and they gave me some creative liberties to kind of put my own spin on it as well. And so, long story short, Sharad, and so my first 2 years full-time into the business after I left Fidelity, were kind of running their acquisitions, working under their wing, doing it virtually too. I never went to a single closing. I was still living in Northern Kentucky at the time, doing it all in Columbus. And that was probably my first 100 or so transactions. And not all of it, but a major thrust was the probate and kind of refining that system, so to speak. So.
Wow. So you guys were doing, or you were doing virtually before like people even know what virtually, virtual wholesaling was. That's awesome, man. So I'm curious, like, what is it about probate that, in your opinion, like makes it stand out? Are you doing direct mail? It's always a challenge to get the list, get in touch with the right people. How are you making that work for you?
Yeah, yeah. So, at a higher level, like what attracted me to probate was there was a manageable amount of records. So, like depending on the county, the market, at the time, Columbus, I was getting 30 to 40 probate records a week. So it's like, okay, this is like 120 to 160 cases, so to speak, or potential
So, sorry,
properties per
Stephen,
month.
just for anyone who's not familiar with probate is, if you can just give a little bit background on like what it is, when a property goes into probate and like just so that there's a little bit of context around it.
Yeah, yeah, great question, Shrat. So, like, basically, probate when somebody dies and they own a property, typically that's going to go into probate unless they have like a trust or something like that set up. And so that process has to go through the courts and it will get distributed out eventually to the heirs, which are commonly referred to as the executors or sometimes personal representative, petitioner, administrator. And so think of, grandmother passes away. She had, three sons, let's just say, and the oldest son is like the executor. They're kind of the decision maker. The other two brothers are heirs in that or beneficiaries. And so, we were able to gather those records from the county and see who has passed away. Was there real estate, involved? And then really gather the information. Who is that personal representative who has filled out paperwork and been appointed as kind of the decision maker for the real estate? And then there typically is an attorney that's assigned kind of as a third party fiduciary to kind of facilitate the process. And so, really started realizing, hey, a lot of these houses are very, very dated. They've maybe been lived in 30, 40, 50 years. There hasn't been a lot of updates. There's typically not a mortgage on them, or maybe a very small, like second mortgage or something. And a lot of the family, whether they live in town or sometimes they live out of state, they have their own residences. They're looking to cash out that property to either pay attorney fees or their own debts, or to gain a portion of their inheritance. And so a lot of times those houses are going to be selling within a couple of months. Most of them end up selling. Sometimes the family members will live there and stuff like that. So we just realized, like, man, there's an opportunity with properties where a lot of the family might live out of town, out of state. It's not like they lived in the house for 30 years with their blood, sweat, and tears paying down the mortgage. This is something that they've kind of been given. And so there was a lot of motivation there. And so that kind of, triggered the idea of, hey, there could be something here by seeing how we could, be in contact and help the ones in particular that, the property needs a lot of work and they might be more, benefited by a cash sale type deal.
Yeah, I would imagine these probate deals can get very tricky and very complicated, right? Because there's not one decision maker, right? There could be multiple people involved. Let's say in the case you mentioned, there's the grandmother that passed away, the lady that passed away has three sons. Now all three people have to agree to sell. Is that correct? So that can
Yeah,
get pretty complicated in that case.
in most cases, yeah, they all three need to agree. So there's definitely some kind of screening that we do to make sure that we're not just going down a wild goose chase, so to speak. But that is kind of another thing that I liked a little bit. Sometimes getting the records from the county can be a little bit of a song and dance. It can be a little challenging. So it does insulate it a little bit. And then also there's a lot of misconceptions around probates, of like, I don't know all the legalities. This seems complex. This seems like if these cases take 6 to 9 months, like I want to get a deal now. I don't want to have to wait a year. And we found that there's still a good portion of deals that happen relatively quickly where the folks are ready to go. And so, that's another little thing that I found attracted to of just like, like there's a lot of misconceptions. Some are valid, and some, we see a little bit of that and a little bit of it happening a lot sooner. And so I said, hey, this is gonna, help this. So yeah.
What have you noticed? I mean, it changes from county to county. What's the best way to get a list of probate? I think that's where there's a lot of confusion, because I feel like people generally tend to take the easy way out is getting the list from like public data provider, but I would imagine those are not like most recent data, like the data that you are getting versus, let's say, if I were to go to a data provider like PropStream or ListSource, if they had a probate list, that's
Right.
already dated list. Like you've already made contacts like 30 to 60 days before the data is available on these list providers. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Getting it from PropStream or some other main data providers is certainly better than nothing. But my favorite is getting it directly from the county. And typically, depending, and the other little tricky part about probate is every county operates a little bit differently. But we've kind of fine-tuned a path, so to speak. There's typically a few obstacles that come up, but either we get it from the county by access of being able to scrape it directly from the county website. It's published for free, or having a courthouse runner, so to speak, go down and gather the information from the courthouse. And so far and beyond, that is the most reliable way, best way to get quickest access to the data. That sometimes provides a little bit of challenges and hurdles, but there's always a way to get those records. And then the next kind of medium solution is there are 2, 3, 4, there's more than that, but there's some decent data providers that really just hone in on probate specifically, that are not, the prop streams and stuff like that. And those records are that's kind of like the medium option, where you're still getting it relatively quickly, still very good, but not as good as just getting it directly from your county
Would you
provider
mind
right away.
sharing some of those data providers that are like faster than the national providers?
Yeah, so there's a lot out there. The four that I recommend are, one is Foreclosures Daily.
Okay.
Foreclosures Daily is a great one. Another one is probatedata.com.
Okay.
Probatedata.com. The next one is alltheleads.com. And then the next one is US lead list. So
Okay.
those would be
Hmm.
four good ones that are not just like, hey, let me try to pull this if they have it on PropStream or something like that. So
All right. So let's say you pull your data from county. What information are you getting and how are you reaching out to these people? I mean, this is a very sensitive topic. They've had a death in the family. You're not sending them, I would imagine you're not sending them like, hey, here's a cash offer. There's a little bit of like emotions involved. How are you managing that?
absolutely. So the data that we're getting is we are getting the name of the deceased. We are getting the property address that has been left behind. We're also getting the name of the executor / personal representative. We don't go down the list and gather all the beneficiary and all the heirs, but just the main person who's appointed to deal with that estate. So they may, the property may be here in Ohio, but the executor might live in Oklahoma. And we're getting that executor's name and their address, and also, their phone number. Sometimes that's in the probate docket file. They'll fill out a piece of paperwork to become the executor, and they're filling out that paperwork and they just put their phone number right on it. And that's not available in every county, but when it is, that's awesome, because it's even way more accurate than any skip trace. And then it'll also list the attorney that's been appointed to it. And then we'll go in and we will look up the attorney's address. We will have a virtual assistant gather their email addresses, which we get about 70% of the attorney emails. And so that's the main thrust of it. And then kind of the system that we do is we will reach out to them via, so one of the first things we do to kind of break this down so it's easily to understand for the audience, if you're doing this full time, So if we get the records, I have a list sent to me every single Sunday night by my virtual assistant. Monday, there's about a 2 or 3 hour time block where we do the mail to these in-house. So I send out an executor letter that is a long form letter that looks like it's coming from the estate, like an official document. And there's a lot of empathy in there, and it's a 1 page letter to the executor, of our interest in the property, but also some of the things that they could be walking through as far as stuff being in the house and being overwhelmed, and so it's a very gentle letter. It's not, beating them over the head with a cash offer. I also send an additional document called What to Expect from Us, and that just is like, hey, this might be super scary, the thought of even working with an investor. Maybe you've never done that before, but like, if that could be an option to serve your family, here's what that looks like. And so I will send those 2 pieces of paper in that document, or in that letter, in that envelope, and then we put a local colorful stamp. So Monday is kind of a direct mail day, and we actually mail the executor and we mail the attorney. Tuesday is kind of is an email communication. So we are emailing the executors and we are emailing the attorneys. And then the rest of the week is cold calling. We are reaching out to both executor and both attorneys. So we really, pursue these from a lot of angles. And there's a whole other thought process on that, because there are a lot of probate attorneys, and even if this property isn't for sale, they may have some others on their desk that they're working with that's, kind of a problem estate, and the attorney has incentive to getting that, done and wrapped up so they can get paid and kind of close out that estate. So we get a lot of deals by reaching out to the attorney and them saying, no, Stephen, that house, they're keeping it in the family, not going to be for sale at all. And we're like, hey, John, appreciate you getting back to us so quick. We're looking to buy a couple more right now. Like, do you, and we send a long form attorney letter that has quite a few bullet points on it. And a lot of times they may have another estate that they're working. And so we'll kind of follow up from that angle as well.
Got it. What have you noticed in your, in your experience? What works the best when you're reaching out to these probate, deals? Is it the letter that generally tends to work best, or email, or call? Or it's a little bit of mix of everything.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So it honestly ebbs and flows. We'll go through this little season throughout the year, and it's not like in certain months, like we just always do both, because like we'll go through a season where we're getting a lot more calls off the executor letter, and or we're getting more calls from the attorney emails back and forth, or just calling out to the executors, and it's kind of even across the board. So we just continue to do that kind
Right.
of three-pronged approach.
Yeah. And then just for context, like how many records on average are you getting every Sunday from your VA?
So I do it in my area in 5 counties. So I'm getting on average 40 to 50. And then I weed that down, the really high end stuff, the really low end stuff, the zip codes that I'm not buying in. I'll take maybe 5 or 7 of them off the list.
Okay.
So my weeded down list is usually about 40. And yeah, so it's about 40 a week, 160 a month that we're marketing
That's for
to.
all 5 counties combined.
Yeah,
Right. So
exactly.
that's a really, really niche list, right?
Yes,
Are
yes.
you stacking it against, let's say you get these 160 properties, let's say they all qualify, but if they have a mortgage, then like, are you going down the route of short sale or no, or you just like you stacking it against the ones that have, also some equity in the properties, or that's
Yeah,
something you look into later?
yeah. For these, since it's such a small list, we market to all of them. So we don't do a ton of filtering besides taking out the zip codes we don't want,
Got
removing
it.
the super high end, super low end stuff. That's the main filtering we do, since it's already such a low quantity.
Yeah, that's like super niche list. What sort of conversion are you seeing, let's say on average, if you get like 150 these probate leads a month, like what does that look like? How many deals does that, or how many conversations you have, and how many deals do you get out of it on month?
Yeah, so this strategy, like I love it. So it's not a crazy quantity. It typically equals about 10 to 15 deals per year using this.
But
So
these are like high, like quality over quantity, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
High
So
margin
like
deals, would imagine.
larger spread deals for sure. Like, I mean, even here in Ohio, where, the average wholesaler might be making 10, 8, 10K, 12K a deal. The probate deals a lot of times are 15, 18, 20.
Yeah.
They're just the larger spread deals. Of course, there's some that are still, 8, 10, 12, of course. But yeah, it's the larger spread. And so I would say the average is about one a month. There's some months where we hit a wave and there's three or two, and other months where there's just one. And so yeah, it's usually in that 10 to 15, deals a year with this
Yeah,
strategy.
I think that's great. And one other thing that's going to be great about these leads is there's not a whole lot of competition. Very, very minimum competition. I would imagine a lot of these cases, you're probably the only investor that they're speaking with, right?
hmm Now, realtors are catching on to this a little bit. So, to be fully transparent, I never want to sugarcoat it. Like you're exactly right, but I would say there may be one or two others that are reaching out, whether it's a realtor or whether it's a big investor in the market, and they're just blanketing stuff with mail. So there is, but it is still very niche, and it's far less
Yeah.
than cold calling the same list or mail one of
Abs-
25 postcards. A lot of times you're either the only one or there might be one or two others.
Yeah. And then if you're targeting probate, your approach is a little bit different, right? Versus a big investor might have this as part of their absentee list or, high equity list. So they're sending out hey, sell your house fast, cash, quick close, versus you're taking a more, targeted approach to where you have, this letter with empathy and, you're just, it's specifically for probate versus like a generic postcard or letter that you're sending out. And what's your exit on these? Are you wholesaling these? Are you keeping some of its rental, fix and flip?
Yeah, it's a great question. So primarily it's been wholesale for us. We do a lot of that. My wife and I now are kind of cherry picking. So we are looking for the ones we want to keep as long-term rentals, but mainly it's wholesale.
Okay. And then are you doing double close or are you doing assignment? And I'm curious, is that something, if you're doing assignment, is that something you disclose to the owners of the property?
I typically don't. I do let them know, of course, I have the partners in this as well, and I let them know that I have a couple of really good buyers that I work with. That I have a bigger buyers list, but there's the handful of the VIP ones that we've done
Right.
business with for years, and so know their criteria and all that stuff too. So yeah, I typically do assignments most of the time, and all of that. So.
What do you see in in your experience as the biggest challenge in doing probate deals?
Yeah, it is when there's family involved and multiple siblings. One might want to sell, one might not. So you do have that from time to time for sure. And then in this market, I mean, it's not crazy different than other lead sources. There are the sellers, of course, that have the unrealistic expectations, or they're thinking the market was a few years ago and wanting all of that. So it's just you have that initially when you're getting it up and running. It's getting the data and doing that. The other side of it are in those situations where one thing we noticed during COVID is that the courts take a hair longer. So you might have somebody that is like, hey, we're still waiting on this. So that does creep in there a little bit. But there are still a lot of them that they're ready to go. So we take the good with the bad on those.
Yeah, no, I think I'm always all about like quality over quantity, rather than like you mentioned, rather than doing like those small margin. There's nothing wrong with that. We just have to keep up the volume. I would much rather like we do fix and flip in Indiana. We go
Uh-huh.
after like high margin deals where we're making minimum, we're not wholesaling minimum 40, $50,000 on every deal. That's kind of a minimum. Rather do
Mhm.
25, 30 of those high volume, I mean high margin deals, then do hundreds of these and then only making 10, 15,000. So yeah, I love the strategy that you have. Is that the only marketing you're doing, probate, or do you do other list also?
Yeah, probate is the main thrust of what we're doing. And then, of course, like different networking and relationships we have. I also send out some small targeted direct mail, and then I do a little bit of cold calling as well with a cold caller. So kind of still those a little bit grassroots approach of something that we've just done for a long time. So
Cool. And then you're also helping other investor, coaching other investors in doing probate deals, right?
yeah, yeah.
What do you notice? Like, I'm always curious, like the biggest challenge do you see or difference that you see between the investors that are successful, in your experience, the ones that you work with versus the ones that, don't quite make it and don't are not consistent with their deal flow?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I would say there's a lot of noise, and so the ones that are taking longer, or they are still listening to a lot of things, trying a lot of different strategies instead of really like niching down and focusing kind of on one area. And then the other thing is just it's not something that's overly sexy to say, but it's the consistency, right? Like they
Right.
may do a part of this system where they try calls for a couple weeks and don't quite see it within 2 or 3 weeks, or they'll just do the mail but intimidated by the calls. So those would be the biggest two things: getting distracted, kind of half in, like, yeah, I'm going to do this
Yeah.
probate thing, but kind of partially doing it or partially consistent. But I'm still going to be doing these other things over here and not fully let this go as well. So that is honestly the biggest thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lack of focus, man, on anything. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think investors are too impatient. They want deal now. They want to get a deal from direct mail before they even go to the post office to send it out. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Steven, this has been amazing, man. We have some other questions as part of our next segment. Other than, crushing it with probate deals, what do you do for fun?
Yeah, what do I do for fun? So my wife and I, we have two little girls, 6 and 4. So I'm a big family guy. Love,
Awesome.
getting our kids out to the park. We're getting ready to go take them to like a Broadway, like Lion King thing. So excited about
Nice.
that. But I honestly, we like getting out to the park, doing a little hiking. Before kids, my wife and I were big into CrossFit. So we still go to the gym, try to stay active, and then just little mini trips and traveling and stuff like that. So that's kind of our fun. And then, for
Awesome,
me,
man.
I do love reading and stuff like that. So continue to do that self-development
Cool.
type stuff.
All right. Speaking of reading, what's the book that's had the biggest impact on your life, or, the one recently that's had the biggest impact? It could be in your personal life or business life or one of each.
Yeah, great question. So I would say the best book as far as personal development for me has been Compound Effect by Darren
Yeah.
Hardy.
Yep.
Just those powers of those consistent small
Yeah.
decisions. So from a business standpoint, just the practicality of executing, that has been a big game changer for me, for sure.
Cool. Yeah. Great book, man. And all right, last question. If you could spend a day with anyone, dead or alive, who would you want to spend the day with and why?
That's an easy one. For me, it's Christ. So my favorite book, the Bible. I think one of the most prominent figure in history. Not to get overly spiritual here, but that I think that would be
Awesome.
the person I would spend with, for sure.
Yeah, you're the fastest with an answer to that question. That's great. Yeah.
No doubt.
Cool. All right, Steven. Anyone who's listening to this conversation wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, two ways. One, Stephen Howell Mentoring, stephenhowellmentoring.com. That's where I put together a little free 10-day boot camp that kind of shows like, hey, here's how I do the letters, here's how I do the calls, all that stuff. I really try to lead with a lot of value with that. So if you go to stephenhowellmentoring.com and just click on the boot camp or subscribe, I have a little newsletter that I send out once a week that I've been sending out for 10 years. And love doing that. And then if you just go to YouTube, Stephen Howell on YouTube. Those would be the
All
the
right.
two
We'll
ways
put
to
links to
connect.
those in the show notes also.
Sweet.
Cool. Awesome, Steven. Thank you so much, man. This has been incredible. I love your approach. I love your, going super niche in your marketing.
Well, that means a lot, Sherrod, and I'm so honored to be here, man. I love what you're doing with Resimply. So appreciate you having me out, and it
Absolutely,
was
man.
a joy to be able to share this stuff. So thank you so much, man. I
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much, man. Thank you.